What would you do if a young girl stood up for her family's legacy and was slapped for it? Would you speak up or stay silent? This is the story of Ava, a quiet warrior with a powerful past, and what happened when Chuck Norris walked in. You won't forget this one. Rain drizzled softly against the glass front of Dojo 47, the most elite martial arts school in the county. Inside, a dozen students moved in synchronized strikes, their white uniforms crisp, their black belts slicing through the air like blades. Every movement echoed discipline, power, and years of prestige. This was no place for amateurs. It was a proving ground. Then the door creaked open. A small figure stood in the doorway, soaked hoodie clinging to her frame, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her name was Ava, and her eyes didn't match the rest of her. They weren't fearful or unsure. They were still, calculating, like she'd been in rooms like this before, only different. The dojo's head instructor, Coach Braxton, a barrel-chested man with a loud voice and louder ego, paused mid-instruction. "You lost?" he barked, not even turning to fully face her. Ava shook her head and stepped onto the polished floor, leaving a faint trail of water behind. She unslung her backpack, reached inside, and pulled out a carefully laminated photograph, creases at every corner, but preserved like treasure. "I'd like to train here," she said plainly. Braxton raised an eyebrow. The students snickered. "And why would I take on a—" He eyed her up and down. "Dripping girl in sneakers who walks in here uninvited." She held the photo up. It showed a young martial artist standing atop a podium, a gold medal around his neck, flanked by other world champions. In the corner of the photo, unmistakably, stood a young Chuck Norris, clapping. "That's my grandfather," Ava said. "He was a world champion. He trained me." The room broke into open laughter. One student fake bowed. Another whispered, "What is this, some Karate Kid remake?" Coach Braxton took a step forward, snatched the photo from her hand, glanced at it, and scoffed. "Cute story. But this isn't a daycare, sweetheart. We train champions, real ones." Then he did the unthinkable. With a quick motion, he slapped the photo to the floor, and as Ava bent to retrieve it, his hand lashed out again, this time striking her across the cheek. Gasps rippled through the dojo. Ava didn't cry. She didn't shout. She slowly stood, her hand resting on her cheek, and met Braxton's eyes with eerie calm. "Then let me show you what a real champion taught me." For a moment, no one moved. Even the rain tapping against the window seemed to hesitate. Coach Braxton stood frozen, his hand still partially raised, as if the act itself had shocked him. But he recovered quickly, a smug smirk crawling across his face. "That's your first lesson," he said, voice low and condescending. "In here, you earn respect, not with stories, not with pictures, but with sweat, bruises, and broken egos." The students didn't know how to respond. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a test. Ava stood motionless, her fingers grazing the sting on her cheek, but her eyes, those sharp, focused eyes, never left the coach. She bent down, picked up the photo again, gently wiped the scuff mark on her grandfather's face, and tucked it back into her bag like it was sacred. "I didn't come here for sympathy," she said quietly. "I came to train, just like he did." Braxton turned to the class, scoffing. "You hear that? She thinks training with ghosts makes her special." The room burst into cruel laughter this time, the kind that stings worse than a punch. One student, tall and lean with a green belt, mockingly bowed to Ava. "Welcome to Dojo 47, Miss Ghost Whisperer." Another mimicked slow, exaggerated martial arts moves like a movie extra. "My grandpa once arm wrestled Bruce Lee," he jeered. "Guess that makes me his sensei." The laughter swelled, but Ava didn't crack. She stepped forward, one step, then another, until she was standing in the middle of the dojo. She unzipped her hoodie and let it fall to the floor, revealing a plain black tank top. No fancy logos, no flashy belt. But her arms told a different story, lightly scarred, sinewy, and disciplined. "Let me earn it," she said again, louder this time. "No talk. No stories. Just give me a shot. Coach Braxton narrowed his eyes, annoyed that the humiliation didn't break her. He liked fear. He liked obedience. But this girl, she had steel in her bones. You want a shot? He growled. Fine. Spar with Diego. If you last 1 minute, I'll let you stay. All heads turned. Diego, the undefeated prodigy of the dojo. Ava simply nodded. 1 minute's all I need. Ava stepped onto the mat like it was sacred ground. The students formed a loose circle around her, whispering and snickering. Most were just waiting to see her get humiliated. A few looked uneasy, but no one dared speak up. Not against Coach Braxton, and definitely not against Diego, the dojo's golden boy. Diego was tall, built like a sprinter, with sharp eyes and faster fists. He wore his black belt like armor, his medals like a resume. At just 17, he'd already won state twice. He rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, and smirked at Ava. You sure you want to do this? He asked almost gently. Ava didn't blink. Yes. Coach Braxton clapped twice. 1 minute, that's all you need to survive. Ready? Diego settled into a traditional stance, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. Ava, in contrast, stood perfectly still. No bouncing, no warm-up, just calm, deliberate focus. It was unnerving. Begin! Diego lunged forward instantly, a flurry of sharp jabs meant to test her reactions. Ava didn't flinch. She moved like smoke, leaning just enough, stepping just enough, letting the strikes miss by millimeters. She wasn't faster, but she was precise, calculated, like she had seen this fight before in her mind 1,000 times. 30 seconds in, murmurs started. She's not even fighting back. What is she doing? Coach Braxton crossed his arms. She's stalling. But Ava wasn't stalling. She was studying. Every strike Diego threw revealed a habit. Every retreat exposed a rhythm. Her eyes were locked onto his hips, not his fists. She was learning his entire style in real time. With 15 seconds left, Diego grew frustrated. You scared to hit me? He barked. He launched a spinning back kick, his signature. Fast, brutal, designed to end matches. That's when Ava moved. A single pivot, a sidestep. Then, crack. Her elbow caught Diego in the ribs mid-spin, and his body dropped like a stone. Gasps erupted around the dojo. Diego groaned, clutching his side, stunned. He wasn't knocked out, but he wasn't getting up fast either. Ava stood over him, breathing steady. Not smug, not triumphant, just present. Coach Braxton's jaw tightened. The bell never had to ring. The 1 minute mark passed, and everyone knew who owned the mat now. The dojo was silent. Diego, the undefeated champion of Dojo 47, was on his knees, one hand pressed to his ribs, his breath shallow. Coach Braxton didn't move. His arms were still crossed, but the color had drained from his face. Ava stood across the mat, calm as ever. No celebration, no grin, just focus. Diego slowly rose to his feet, his pride more bruised than his body. He glanced at the students, all of whom had been cheering for him minutes ago. Now they looked unsure. You got lucky, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for a few to hear. But Ava didn't bite. She didn't need to. The truth was already written on the mat between them. Coach Braxton finally broke the silence. Again, he barked. You think one lucky shot makes you special? You want to stay? Prove it wasn't a fluke. Some students whispered, that's not fair, but no one dared say it aloud. Ava turned her head slightly. So the rules change when someone new wins? Braxton's face twitched. Round 2, he growled. Begin. Diego came at her with fury now. No grace, no strategy, just raw emotion. He was faster this time, and his blows were heavier, wild. But Ava didn't panic. She absorbed the storm, parried the chaos. It was like watching poetry unravel against a hurricane. Then came the opening. Ava ducked a wide hook, stepped inside, and swept his legs with a move so fluid it looked rehearsed. Diego hit the mat hard, twice in one day. This time, he didn't move. Gasps rippled again. But Ava didn't bask in it. She took a step back, bowed deeply, and waited. Coach Braxton's lips were a thin line. His pride was unraveling. "Where did you learn that?" he snapped. Ava met his gaze and spoke, calm but clear. "My grandfather. He said real power isn't in the punch. It's in knowing when not to throw it." Someone in the back of the dojo murmured. Who was her grandfather? Ava stepped forward, pulled the old photo from her bag and held it up again. He trained world champions, including Chuck Norris. The room erupted in laughter again, louder this time. Disbelief, mockery, until a deep, unmistakable voice cut through the noise from the entrance. "She's not lying." Heads whipped around. Chuck Norris was standing in the doorway. You could hear a pin drop. Every head in the dojo turned slowly toward the entrance. And there, standing just inside the doorway, like a scene out of a forgotten legend, was Chuck Norris. Not a cardboard cutout, not a look-alike, the Chuck Norris. Time seemed to slow. Even the rain outside had paused, like nature itself was holding its breath. He stepped in, his black boots echoing against the polished floor, eyes scanning the room with that same calm intensity that once silenced movie villains and real-life doubters alike. Students backed away instinctively, clearing a path. Coach Braxton blinked twice, as if his brain couldn't quite compute what he was seeing. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Chuck stopped just short of the sparring mat. His eyes moved from the crumpled Diego to the stunned coach, then finally settled on Ava. "She's not lying," he said again, his voice steady as granite. "Her grandfather was a warrior, one of the best I ever trained with." Ava bowed respectfully. A murmur rippled through the room. One student even whispered, "Wait, so she's karate royalty?" Coach Braxton tried to recover, puffing his chest. "Mr. Norris," he stammered, I had no idea you were visiting. If I'd known—" Chuck raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "You knew nothing because you never bothered to ask," Chuck said, walking slowly toward Ava. "This young lady came in here with humility, with respect, and you met her with arrogance and violence." Braxton opened his mouth to protest, but Chuck didn't give him the chance. "You struck her. For speaking her truth, for honoring her legacy. That's not coaching. That's cowardice." The words landed harder than any punch. Diego was now sitting upright, watching everything with wide eyes. The other students exchanged glances. The mood in the room had shifted entirely. The whispers turned into reflection, doubt, guilt. Ava stood motionless, but her eyes glistened. Chuck turned to her and said, "Your grandfather would be proud. You've got his calm, his control, and his fire." Then he faced the room. "Respect is earned, yes, but it can also be inherited if it's honored. And this girl, she honors it better than most of you ever will." Coach Braxton paled, because everyone in that room could feel it. The power had shifted. Coach Braxton stood stiff, hands clenched at his sides, his ego unraveling in front of the legend he'd once idolized. But there was no defense to make, no excuse that would survive in the presence of Chuck Norris, who now stood as both witness and reckoning. Chuck turned to the students. "You come to a dojo not just to learn how to strike," he said, his voice measured, but full of weight, "but how not to. You come to master not just your opponent, but your own pride." The students listened, silent, absorbing every syllable like scripture. Coach Braxton tried once more. "Look, I've trained champions. I don't tolerate disrespect. She walked in here with more discipline than you've shown all day," Chuck interrupted, eyes sharp. "You saw a girl with no belt and no reputation, and you mocked her, struck her, then sent your top fighter to humiliate her." He looked toward Ava, who stood with her arms folded behind her back, still perfectly composed. "And she didn't retaliate out of anger," Chuck continued. "She didn't gloat. She bowed. She waited. That's martial arts. That's legacy." Diego's eyes dropped to the floor. Some of the younger students shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter turning to shame. The same girl they'd mocked for her story had just been publicly defended by the most respected martial artist alive. "Dojo 47 has become a place of ego," Chuck said, his voice echoing off the walls. "Not honor, and that ends today." He turned to Ava. How would you like to lead a class? Ava blinked. Me? He nodded. They could all learn from you. The room gasped again, not in disbelief, but admiration. Something had changed, not just in the power dynamic, but in the hearts of the students watching. Even Diego gave a slow nod, his earlier arrogance melting away. Coach Braxton looked stunned, stripped of control, stripped of illusion. Wait, he muttered. You can't just... Chuck stepped forward until he was face to face with him. You're right. You can't, but I can. And with that, Chuck pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket and handed it to the front desk. It bore the stamp of the National Martial Arts Federation. Effective immediately, Chuck Norris was assuming temporary leadership of Dojo 47, and Ava, she would be his assistant instructor. The next morning, Dojo 47 looked different. The same mats, the same walls, the same students. But the energy had shifted. Gone was the cloud of fear and ego that had hung over the room like a storm. In its place was something sharper, calmer, focused, and at the center of it all stood Ava, this time not as a challenger, but as a leader. She wore a plain black gi, no flashy badges or embroidery, no belt yet. Chuck had insisted that she wouldn't wear one until she decided she'd earned it, not for the world, but for herself. The class lined up quietly. Even Diego took his place without protest, his stance humbler, his gaze thoughtful. Chuck stood off to the side, arms folded, watching, observing. Ava stepped forward. Today we begin again, she said, her voice calm but commanding. Not because we forgot what came before, but because we choose to build something better. The students nodded. No sarcasm, no giggles, just respect. First lesson, she continued, control of your breath, of your body, of your impulse. She demonstrated a slow kata, each movement deliberate, precise, like ink strokes on parchment. The students followed, some clumsily, some with grace, but all with intent. As the session progressed, Chuck couldn't hide the small smile on his face. She wasn't just mimicking her grandfather's legacy, she was living it and shaping it into her own. Halfway through class, Coach Braxton entered quietly through the side door. No booming voice, no barking orders, just silence. He stayed in the back, watching as Ava led drills with more patience and clarity than he'd ever shown. He looked smaller now, not physically but in presence, like a once proud statue finally worn down by truth. When class ended, the students bowed, not out of habit, but out of something deeper. Ava bowed back. As they dispersed, Diego approached her. Hey, he said, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. That elbow? It was clean. You got me fair. Ava smiled faintly. Thank you, he nodded. If you ever want to spar again, maybe I can learn something this time, she chuckled. Maybe we both can. Behind her, Chuck Norris stepped forward. You're not just leading a class, he said to Ava. You're leading a movement, one built on respect, not reputation. And she believed him, because the girl they laughed at yesterday was now the sensei they were all trying to impress. Weeks passed, and the legend of Dojo 47's transformation began to spread like wildfire. Parents who once pulled their children from the school now lined up to enroll them. News crews came sniffing around, eager to verify the rumors. Was it true Chuck Norris had taken over a local dojo? Was it true a teenage girl had earned the respect of a master? But Ava didn't seek the spotlight. She kept teaching, quietly, powerfully, just like her grandfather taught her. One Friday evening, after class had ended and the mats were empty, Ava lingered in the corner of the dojo. The light from the overhead bulbs cast soft shadows as she unrolled a faded black and white photograph. Her grandfather, mid-strike, sparring with a young Chuck Norris. She ran her fingers over it gently. You made it here, came Chuck's voice from behind. Ava looked up. Still a long way to go. He stepped beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. You know, your grandfather once told me that the highest rank in martial arts isn't a black belt. It's character. And after watching you, I finally understand what he meant. Ava smiled but didn't speak. She didn't need to. Outside, students were still buzzing with energy, laughing, stretching, helping one another clean up. The dojo had become more than a place to punch and kick. It had become a community, a family. Coach Braxton, now attending every session as a student, stayed quiet in the back row. He never asked for forgiveness, but his consistency, his humility, had become its own kind of apology. Ava didn't hold a grudge. She didn't need to. The mat had already spoken. That night, Chuck stood before the class one last time. "I came here to correct something that had gone off track," he said, "but what I found was someone ready to lead." He turned to Ava. "This dojo belongs to you now." The students erupted into applause. Ava bowed slowly, her voice steady. "It doesn't belong to me," she said. "It belongs to us, to anyone willing to train with respect." She looked around the room, at Diego, now her training partner, at the young kids who mimicked her movements, at the humbled coach, now relearning everything, and she felt it in her bones. Her grandfather's spirit, his legacy, still alive, still kicking, and still changing the world, one stance at a time. Sometimes true strength isn't about the hardest punch or the fastest kick. It's about standing tall with honor, even when the world doubts you. Ava showed us that legacy is more than bloodline. It's courage, respect, and the fire to change the game. Her fight has just begun.